Okay, Ines, I think this is back to you again, and then I'll come back on again.
Yes, thank you, Diane. Okay, so now you've seen some examples of what the output of a point prevalence survey looks like. And we've talked about how you can use it to inform your stewardship interventions and activities. So for this last part of today's workshop, we have an exercise for you. And so for this exercise, you are the stewardship expert in your hospital. You are the PPS lead in your hospital, a member of the stewardship committee. And so you've done, in this case, global PPS in your hospital. You've entered all the data. You have gone and downloaded the report. And so now you need to look at your results, interpret them, and think about if you want to improve something, what you would like to improve and how you would like to go about this. So what will happen is that we've selected a few slides or pages from an example feedback report for you from a hospital in a country in Africa. And I will just briefly walk you through these example results. And then afterwards, we will give you some time. You can, through a link that will be shared in the chat, I think, you can go and take a look at the slides at your own pace. And then we will ask you to fill in some questions using Mentimeter. But I think Diane will explain the practical details later. So for now, I will just walk you through the example. And so you can already take a look at the report. Next slide, please. Yeah, next slide, please. This is the first page of your hospital's PPS report. And so I've shown this page earlier in the presentation. This is the one that reports the quality indicators. And so you see here again, it is divided by medical, surgical, and ICU. And then you have the respective quality indicators. Don't worry if it goes too fast, you will be able to take a look at the slides in more detail yourself later. But for now, let's go to the next slide, please. This is one that we haven't shown yet. This is an example of a slide that reports on the duration of surgical prophylaxis. So you see for our hospital, you see it's the bar on top. And then the other bars are the reference or the benchmarking data rather. And you see in red, this is the percentage of antibiotic prescriptions that have been prescribed for more than 1 day. In orange, you see the percentage of prescriptions that have been prescribed for multiple doses, but within 1 day, so less than 1 day. And then in green, you see the percentage of surgical antibiotic prophylaxis prescriptions that were administered as a single dose. Okay, we go to the next slide. Here you see an example of the AWARE classification for our hospital. And in this case, again, it's for surgical prophylaxis. So here it focuses on antibiotic prescriptions for surgical prophylaxis at the time of the PPS. And you see in green the percentage of access antibiotics for surgical prophylaxis, and in yellow the percentage of watch antibiotics for surgical prophylaxis. Again, the hospital data is at the top and the benchmarking data is are the bars below. Okay, next slide, please. This is then again for surgical prophylaxis, but a little bit more detailed. The most frequently used antibiotics for surgical prophylaxis in our hospital. And so what you mainly want to look at here is the green bars, because there's a lot of colors here, but the green bars represent the most commonly used antibiotics for surgical prophylaxis in our hospital. So we have metronidazole, parenteral, ceftriaxone, and levofloxacin, which are the three most commonly used antibiotics for surgical prophylaxis. And then the other colors are the benchmarking data. So for country, continent, hospital type, and Europe. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I think I will stop here and give the word back to Diane so she can talk you through the questions.
Thank you very much, Ines. So, for all on the call, thank you very much. This session is really an opportunity for us to put into practice what we would want to ensure patient safety. So it does not matter if you are a hospital clinician or a microbiologist or a lab colleague, a nurse. Doesn't matter if you work in the ministry, doesn't matter if you're an administrator. Everyone can get involved here. So there are some questions for you to consider, and there is a Mentimeter. Kieran, if I could just please ask, or probably Kieran, if I could ask for the direct link to the Mentimeter to be added to the chat, or you can show the slide quickly and then we can come back to that. So on the Mentimeter, it's an opportunity, it's individual work, but we are going to go into breakout rooms. So I need to explain this in a range of ways. So what will happen now is we'll go into breakout rooms. There'll be 4 of them. So there'll be about 50 people, no, about 30 or 40 per group. And then either myself, Ines, Anne, or Peter will go into one of those rooms. It is an opportunity for you to ask us questions. We thought it might be easier for you to ask questions with a group of 50 rather than a group of 150 people. So we'll go into a breakout room now. And what we want you to do is looking at the feedback data. There is a link again in the chat, and we'll post it into your breakout room shortly, which has the PDF of the data. So that's the feedback data. It's got the examples of the data that we just presented. And what we would like you to do is choose any of these random questions, any of these questions. You don't have to do them in order. You can decide to focus on behaviors. You can decide to focus on interventions. You can decide to focus on documentation. You can decide to focus on targets. But what we want you to do is basically assume that you are the lead for antimicrobial stewardship in your institution, and the feedback data that has come back to you is what is we have presented. And we want you to come up with some interventions and put it onto the Mentimeter. I really encourage you to have a go. There is no right or wrong answer, just have a go. And then when we finish, we will feedback and share back some answers so that all of us are on the same page and I've learned this. So there's an opportunity for some interactive session. So Kieran, if you can put us into the breakout rooms now, that would be helpful. Okay, so this looks great. Okay. So there are 2 things. Will has just put something into the chat, which is about evaluation of today's session. This is different from the post-training survey, which leads to the slides and a certificate. This is really for us to understand how you found the session. So it's about how you thought you thought the session was delivered, and if there's anything we could do better for next time. We've got one more training session that we're going to do on gender and inclusion. So we'll learn from this for future events. So please do feel free to complete that evaluation form. Okay, so back to this. This is really great to see. So looking at the feedback data, what the word cloud does is the phrase that people use the most becomes the biggest. And what most of you have chosen, which was also our choice, is surgical prophylaxis. But I also like that people chose stop or review date, stop date. So again, looking at the quality indicators, you could see where you wanted to focus. I can see that some people have said they want to focus on carbapenems, duration of treatment, antibiotic prophylaxis. This is also linked to surgical. So there's a lot of surgery also dotted elsewhere. But I think that this is really important. WHO reserve group, that's a really important one, because in the surgical prophylaxis compared to other countries, there was a big use of reserve antibiotics. Next one, please, Kieran. So how do you define targets, or what would you do for your targets? So people have got a range there, you want to improve prescribing pattern. I think so one thing to highlight here is that your target needs to be quite specific. So I really like the example here around in June 2021, more than 50% prophylaxis of antibiotics for obstetrics. So I'm assuming the person has then said by X date, we want to do one. I like the one in the middle there that talks about to increase stop or review date documentation to at least 70% by the end of, I'm assuming that's 2021, not 2020. And then people want to shorten duration. That's really important. And again, you want to, someone said, shorten antibiotic use post-surgery by 1 to 3 days. Can you scroll down on this one, Kieran? Are there any more? Or was that it?
I think that's...
How many people completed this one? 51 people completed it. It's fine. It's okay. It's supposed to scroll. Yeah, there we go. So by X time and X% patients receiving surgical prophylaxis will do so for less than 1 day. That's a really good example of a target for surgery. Next one, please. So what would be your target audience? So some have said nurses, doctors, surgeons. So depending on what you chose will depend on who your target audience is. So obviously if it's surgical prophylaxis, you may choose to focus on both the surgeons and the nurses, and your focus for them will be different. So for the surgeons, you'll be wanting them to prescribe to make sure that they prescribe the surgical prophylaxis in the first instance. For the nurses, it will be that they give the surgical prophylaxis on time. And also the nurses could prompt the surgeons to review the antibiotic, the length duration of antibiotics as an example. And yeah, surgeons are also doctors. There's some people wanted to focus on lab staff. So again, it depends on if your focus was on diagnostics. And you can also focus on patients. Within a hospital, it's sometimes a bit more challenging, but patients can also ask the question, do I still need to be on this antibiotic? Next slide, please. Next one. And then what behavior you want to change. So there's a range here. So prescribing patterns, that's good. Behavior to prescribe. Keep scrolling down, please. There's a behavior around giving prophylaxis as a single dose or stopped within 24 hours, yes, and then proper documentation of stop or review date. Yes, behavior, non-compliance to guidelines is a behavior. Surgical prophylaxis use is a behavior. These are all behaviors. So there's a key one there around prescribing patterns and the belief that microbiology is not important in prescribing antibiotics. That's a really good one. And so how do we start to encourage people to make sure that they send blood cultures or to send cultures for analysis so that you can then have targeted prescribing? Adherence to guidelines as well is important. Next one, please, Kieran. Again, was behavior would you want to change? And that's fine. Next one, please. And then what stewardship interventions would you put in place? Somebody said prospective audit and feedback and training. That's really important. Guidelines, that's really important. IV to oral switch, that's really important intervention. Education and training, lots of education and training. Dose optimization, guidelines, chart reviews on a regular basis. That's a really important one. Restrictive prescriptions, yes. So you can, for the reserve antibiotics, you can do a restrictive guideline, which says if you want to prescribe these antimicrobials, you need to get permission first, as an example. And approval, that's it. Approval for extensive use. Training, again, conducting PPS routinely, formulary restriction, encouraging physicians to stick to guidelines. It's very difficult though. One thing I haven't seen there is availability of the guidelines. Can your prescribers easily access guidelines? And this is an example of why we created the CwPAMS app. So if you go onto any of your app stores, you can find, if you search for, I think if you search for Commonwealth Pharmacists Association, you'll then be able to link to the app easily. Next one, please. So this question here is, have you previously documented your intervention? And I think that this is really important. I can see that some people have said they're unsure. What we mean by this is that when you're developing your interventions, it's really important that you write it down somewhere, either in your report or your presentation or your reports to hospital management, and that you clearly highlight what those interventions are. Who is it targeted at? What is it targeted? What are you targeting or focusing on? And when do you want the interventions to take place? It's a good way. It's a way of you having a record of the different interventions that you have put in place. So, for example, if your hospital management or the medical director comes and says, why do we keep having resistance patterns? You can say, well, this is the things that we have tried at different time points, and this is what worked and what didn't work. So that's why it's important to document your interventions. Next slide. I have a feeling that might be the last one. How will you measure effectiveness? Yeah, PPS, there's so many different ways. Pre and post test. So yes, if you do an education and training session, you can do a pre and post assessment of people's knowledge and understanding. Okay, next one, please. I think, is that the last one, Kieran? Okay, so if you can please then just go to our slide set again, please, Kieran. Yeah, we'll find a way to share the Mentimeter results. So again, we'll share this when we get the post, when we do the post-training feed questionnaire. So once people complete it, we'll send a certificate as well as a set of slides in some way. We're not sure yet how we'll do that. We'll need to put it online somewhere or a way for you to access it because they're large files. Next one, please, Kieran. Next one. Next one. Keep going. One more. Okay, so just very quickly to highlight and to provide feedback for you so that we're all on the same place. The post questionnaire will be sent to the emails that you used to register. If you have been able to access this without registering, I would recommend that you put your email into the chat box, but only if you didn't register, please. And we'll collate those emails and send you the post feedback, the post training survey. So anyways, just highlight very quickly here, you can see that from a medical point of view, guidelines were missing for 60% of the patients. Stop of review date was missing for 46%. So you may want to focus on that from a medical department point of view. And then for surgery, 98% had missing guidelines and 40% had missing stop or review date. So for, most people chose surgery, but there was some information there around missing guidelines from medical parts as well, medical prescribing. Next slide. And then for surgical prophylaxis, some of the key things here is a prolonged surgical prophylaxis. So all more than one day, 100% was more than one day. And then whereas in the country, so in the same country, it's 92% is more than one day. I mean, either way, it's still not, it's still quite a lot. And then compared to Europe, it's 24% is more than one day. So there are still activities through different countries across Europe to try and bring that down. Because once you're going past the one day, it's no longer prophylaxis, it's probably treatment. Or medical, or it's no longer prophylaxis, it's treatment. Obviously, for some surgery, you need to redose. For long surgery, you need to do 2 doses, but there should be more than one day is no longer prophylaxis. Next slide. And then in terms of the there's high use of watch antibiotics and some use of not recommended in the country, but in this particular hospital, a high use of watch antibiotics. So really important to focus on that and to consider what can you do. Again, if you look at that from the hospital to the country to Africa, and then to tertiary hospital, and then to across Europe as well. Okay, next one. Again, you can have a look there in terms of the use of antimicrobials and the particular antimicrobials that were used in that surgery. Is that according to your guidelines? Or if there's no guidelines, should you be developing guidelines in the first instance so that people can use that? One thing I can highlight is that for those in Africa, Africa CDC is developing some guidelines at the moment for countries where they don't have national prescribing guidelines already. But in many countries, there are national prescribing guidelines. So really important that people are following those and using them. Next slide. So, if you wanted to set some targets for your surgical prophylaxis, you could set it based on duration or which antibiotics were mostly prescribed or what diagnosis. I think, in a quality improvement way, you don't want to have too many targets at the same time. It's always helpful to have one or two and really have focused attention on that. And then you can move on to the next one, because otherwise people get overwhelmed and fed up. Okay, next slide. I think that may be the last one. Okay, so thank you so much. Actually, Will, back to you.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. I think it was a really great session. As we've mentioned, we're really grateful if you can complete the SurveyMonkey link that's been shared in the chat box. That's based on how you found today's event, so that we can learn from how we've administered the event and delivered the event going forward. Just to stress, this is distinct from this is different from the post-training evaluation, which will be sent to you by email. So please keep an eye out for that. And once you've completed that, you'll then be able to access the slides, the Mentimeter results, and also a certificate of your attendance. So yes, thank you again from Seth, from CPA, from Global PPS team, from Peter, the WHO PPS author, for attending. Thank you very much, and I hope you'll consider attending future events as well. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. And again, if you're tweeting, please don't forget to add the hashtag CwPAMS so that other people can learn as well some of your key learning points. Thank you all so much. Have a great afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are. If the team can stay on, is that okay?
I can stay for a few more minutes. Yeah. But
okay.
In 10 minutes,
bye-bye.
I have to leave anyway.
Yeah. Bye-bye to everybody from the Global PPS team as well. And meet you and see you on the next time.
Okay, there are still over 100, but they're going slowly.
So Peter, I think what I think may be useful is if we end the meeting well, and then we all rejoin back in, the team rejoin back in.